Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of the CEDH cast. My name is Ian, and with me as always is my co-host Braden.
Hey all.
On this week's episode, we are going to be talking about the metas that exist in the online CEDH world. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the Finnish meta, the CEDH Cockatrice meta, and the CEDH Nexus. But before we go into those specifics, we have a patron shout-out. Braden, who are we shouting out this week?
We're shouting out one of our most interesting patrons, Playing with Power. Playing with Power is, I think, the most popular CEDH YouTube channel out there. They create amazing videos. They're really cool. And they've been a patron of ours for a pretty long time. And we just want to say thank you by giving them a shout out.
Yeah, thank you so much. And not only have they been an amazing supporter of us, but I was able to jump on stream with them at one point, which was a really great time. I was actually just watching it yesterday, just reminiscing about the great time we all had together. And we also have, come to Ryan and the crew for, advice or actually a couple of our thumbnails before. So they've been really great to work with, and we can't appreciate their support even more. So thank you so much. All right, moving on to the main topic. We're going to be talking about the metas that exist in CEDH, and specifically, now that we live in this post-Flash world, what we're seeing a lot in these metas. So, Braden, you wanted to talk about a specific one, the Finnish meta. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, the Finnish meta is not really an online meta as much as a paper meta that also some of them play online. It's a very strange meta. It's very different than like what we usually think of when we think of like CEDH metas, which is why it's something that comes up so often. You don't hear a lot about the Danish meta or, the California meta. You don't really hear those things. But right. You do hear a lot about the Finnish meta. In the last month, the Finnish meta has come up. I just did a little research before this video. In the official CEDH Reddit Discord, the word Finnish, the phrase Finnish meta has come up 26 times in the last month. So almost every day, wow, someone is mentioning the Finnish meta on average.
That's so funny.
It's a very commonly brought up topic because the Finnish meta is so weird. Yeah, weird is the right way, but it's just so different. So it's a very ad nauseum and storm-centric meta. It's not a very large group of people. It's not like the Nexus where there's like 1,500 people. It's just like, a normal paper meta where there's like maybe dozens of people. And in the meta, the most popular thing to be doing in general is playing, dockside extortionists and bounce spells and rituals and ad nauseums and storming off super aggressively. So what that means for the people playing in that meta is that the mid-rangey, like medium green type stuff that we see like a lot, at least in my paper meta, and we see it I think pretty commonly online. People talk about those types of decks, like a Kess mid-range deck or Evolution.
It's a lot of the grindy good stuff decks, yeah.
Yeah. Any deck that's on Seaborn Muse probably doesn't actually fare that well there for a few reasons. First of all, it's so fast, and second of all, they play such a high density of removal spells because those removal spells double as rituals with dockside extortionists.
Right.
So permanent based value decks have like serious problems in those metas. Additionally, they play odd cards like Phantasmal Image to copy their opponent's dockside extortionists since they're so common. So it's kind of it's pretty inbred, I would say, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I think like it just is like it's at a point now where I don't know if it's solved, but just like the best thing to do is the thing that other people are usually doing. Because when you have like one ad nauseum deck at a table, it's pretty easy to manage that person usually. When you have three other ad nauseum decks at the table, like it becomes an unmanageable mess.
And I always find that very interesting about the Finnish meta. Like I was curious, like, does their meta just play like the expression ships in the night where they're just passing by each other? Or do you think that they have like an appropriate amount of interaction to like deal with the fact that everyone's just trying to do that back to back?
I think they've like come to the conclusion that there's not enough of them that want to force mid-range decks.
Right.
That mid-range decks are good. So like in the American meta, there's so many people trying to force mid-range decks that mid-range decks are good because there's so many people on mid-range decks that getting bigger than the mid-range decks is like an actual viable strategy, which then makes like the mid-range decks actually mid-range decks. They actually do play in an adaptive manner where there's faster decks that they play slowly against and slower decks that they play faster against because there's so many people forcing mid-range. The next meta we're going to be talking about is like literally forcing mid-range all the time. And this meta doesn't do that. And I think that's like why it's so interesting. So like as I'm testing Paco, I'm trying to play against these Finnish players because like I don't play against a lot of people like that, but I want to prove that like Paco is actually a good deck, and one of the ways of doing that is playing against its worst matchup. And the Finnish meta is just the whole meta is Paco's worst matchup. So being able to play against those players and consciously like seeking them out is actually very beneficial to me as like a deck builder because it's a great atmosphere for testing. that's
Definitely.
that's like why I think it comes up so often is because it's like a when people are and it sometimes isn't positive. Like sometimes people will be like dies to removal, but the
Hmm.
CDH version of that is like, but what if everyone's playing ad nause? And the Finnish meta is like literally people doing that.
Yes, exactly.
So it comes up a lot. But I mean, sometimes when you're building a deck, you just have to say like, well, I don't play against three ad nauseum decks, so I don't need to worry about that.
There's a certain level of like, yeah, against three ad nauseum decks, a fourth ad nauseum deck's probably the best place you want to be. But like, if you're not in that environment all the time, you're definitely going to cater to an environment where you're making your deck worse, right? So it depends on what you're seeing the
Yeah,
most.
it seems like people in this meta are more interested in optimization, or they just find that to be fun. Where like, if you play against like most CDH players, they're usually playing what they think is fun and is good, not necessarily what they
Yeah.
think is good. And so there's probably some difference in the average player in that meta than the average player in like my CDH meta, but it's probably we're digging down to such niche differences that like any small thing could be the difference. Like it's not like there's a huge difference.
So going from that, it sounds like you think that they're doing it quote by quote like right. Like do you think that they are at the highest point of what the format can be?
If everyone was like optimizing for the format perfectly, probably it's kind of like
Really?
yeah, like mid-range decks are only good because people play bad decks. And mid-range decks can fall
Huh.
into that category of bad decks. Like medium green is very good because it takes advantage of people playing decks that are only good against other people playing those kinds of decks. Where turbo ad nauseum decks are usually just good. They test the table every game. Testing the
Hmm.
table is just an inherently powerful thing to do. And so
Sure.
and so they're always at least doing something. And mid-range decks often don't do anything if they're in the wrong meta. So I guess to me, it's like if you have a deck that's good in almost every meta, at almost every table, let's say, right? And then you have a
Hmm.
deck that is really good against decks like it. It kind of makes sense that you'd only play the deck that is good against everything, right? And when I say good
Yeah.
against everything, I don't mean like it wins more than the other decks. I just mean if we're thinking of this as like a game, the game itself is picking which deck to play. There's a correct solution, and it's probably to play turbo ad nauseum decks. However, they're not so much better than everything else that it's the wrong choice.
It's
It's
not as
like
bad as when Flash Hulk was
yeah,
around.
like when Flash Hulk was
Yeah.
around, it was so much better because it was the best adaptive deck and the best proactive deck.
Right.
And so it was so good that if you wanted to play it, I think there was enough different types of players where it was the best deck to play Flash Hulk that Flash Hulk just saw the most play. People still played other
Sure.
decks, but it was so good that enough people were playing it that it kind of did the same thing that these ad nauseum metas are having, where like every
Mm.
time a new person plays like Fish Hulk gets better. And ad nauseum
Sure.
decks are kind of like that. Like once someone has stopped the first ad nauseum deck, the second ad nauseum deck just wins.
That makes
So
sense. Yeah.
I think like yeah, turbo ad nauseum is probably the optimal choice to be playing if we're thinking of like the game of Magic being what deck to play. But I think enough people aren't playing that way that that's not really the case.
Gotcha.
So I think if everyone was playing optimally, turbo ad nauseum would be the correct play. Because people inherently don't play optimally because either they don't understand how the format works or they just want to play what's fun, it is not the optimal choice. It is a interesting choice, and that's what makes Magic fun.
Interesting.
Yeah. Sorry, we went way off topic there, but um, that's why the fish meta is so cool. Is because it's such a it reveals something. I think it reveals something about CDH that might not be obvious.
Yeah, I found that whole thing interesting, and I don't have enough of a formulated, clear thought to express it. I don't know if I quite agree with it, but you definitely make a lot of good points there, and I definitely want to like take time to like think about that.
Yeah.
Maybe we can come back to it next episode.
I do want to be super clear. I don't think it's the optimal choice to always play like farm decks or ad nauseum decks because of other outside factors that you can never get rid of unless I guess you're the Finnish meta. that at least in America we'll never get rid of.
Sure, sure.
Maybe that's
fair.
because in Europe there are less EDH players, and so there's less people converting from EDH to
To
CEDH.
CEDH, yeah.
And so the CEDH players are coming from other Eternal formats where optimization is like more core to the culture. I don't know. These are guesses. I'm just guessing. I mean, I'm sure Finnish people
Yeah.
will listen to this and be like, "Oh my God, Braden, please shut up." But
And it's very interesting because we're going to talk about it later. There's the pervasive nature of EDH as a whole spreading into CEDH, like the casual ideals of like this is my deck, right? That sort of idea to it. And we definitely are gonna, when we talk about the Nexus metagame, I'd like to talk about that a little more. But for now, why don't we move on to the r/competitive EDH meta? Do you
Yeah,
want to talk
sure.
about that?
So this is usually called the practice meta, and usually I think people will disagree with me here. But as someone who plays in it quite a bit, I think it's looked down upon a little bit.
So there is, to clarify here, right? The practice meta, because on r/competitive EDH there are different ways that you can sign up to play, right?
So there's like open, which I don't even know what that means. Then there's practice, which is like practice for ranked play, and then there's ranked play. I think practice is probably the most popular way to play Magic on that Discord. So the idea is like people are practicing for ranked, but most of the time, I think when people are just playing that because like it's not as strict, you know?
Right.
Like there's rules enforced, like you don't throw games, but also it's not like people aren't playing for, you know, prizes or their rank, so it's a little bit more casual. It kind of like meets that like middle zone.
There's something similar in the Nexus. Yeah, I agree.
So the practice meta is very strange in a different way. I once heard someone call it, which I of course love to hear, the Paco meta. So the meta there is super grindy. It's lots of mid-range decks. I mean, you won't believe me when I say this, but like before the companion nerf, like Gigantha Sisay was one of the most popular decks.
That's
like,
still wild to me.
Yeah, like maybe not the most popular, but it was definitely, I remember seeing it in like a lot of games I played. There's a lot of people playing, I don't know if pet deck is the right word, but just decks that are like being tested. Like, what's the name of the...
Well, like the new spice, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, there's also other stuff like Bobby plays the mono red goblin that whenever it deals damage to an opponent, you exile the top. Yeah, he plays mono red Grenzo, and that deck like is sick. Like, there's just stuff. There's a lot of stuff like that where like people are, I mean, that's a very grindy red deck. But
I'm very curious to that list. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I've played it before. It's pretty sick. Like, this is like years ago, before Dockside.
Yeah.
But there's just a lot of grindy stuff. So like, I'll just list off some stuff you see a lot. Tayum. I've seen a lot of Tayum recently. It's like a it's like a hate bears-y combo deck.
Interesting.
Devoted Druid. There's a lot of like Riel, Keenan, Paco. A lot of Paco. There's a few people testing Paco at a time in that Discord. Someone said that it's a lot of Staxy and low color nonsense, which I really liked. I think that's accurate. So yeah, there's almost no Thrasios and Tymna.
Interesting.
And the meta is super weak to Adnals. So if you go in with an Adnals deck, you're probably going to win. You have to go above or below the mid-range to win. And if you do that, I think you win pretty consistently. So Paco goes way above the mid-range decks. The Adnals decks go way below the mid-range decks. And that's how you can like... It's a very solvable meta. It's like solvable. Where we talked about how the last meta was solved. This meta is solvable. I mean, it's not being solved.
Yeah.
I don't think, because people are always testing new stuff, but it's like solvable.
That's what the
its
meta
nature.
is for, right? Is a practice meta. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of spicy stuff in this meta. I have so much fun playing in it though, because you get to play like jank.
Yeah.
The first game I ever played with Paco was in that Discord. I think that the practice meta is really fun. It's definitely like an inviting place, I'd say. It's on Cockatrice, and it's definitely solvable, I'd say.
Yeah, I want to clarify something that we said earlier. Like, just because the decks are more experimental, it doesn't mean that anyone is going in there with less of a CEDH mindset. Like, the games are still being played the same. It's not like people are like putting in like, oh, this is my fun, flavorful card. It's not like that sort of casual atmosphere. Like, people are still building optimized versions of whatever decks they're playing. It's just, you know, they're playing decks like Paco and Tayum and, you know, things like
Yeah. I mean, there are people
new.
playing like I would say like people do go in and play competitive decks. Like, I played against Medium Green the other night. The other person, Ano, who has the other list that's on the decklist database under mid-range consult, was playing Medium Green, I think. So like, you see it. It's just not common. Like, I think that was the first time or second time I played against Thrasios and Tymna in that meta. Although you'll see like Kess and you'll see other stuff like that, but I definitely would go in expecting like weird jank. I play against Grand Arbiter. Bobby plays Grand Arbiter. David plays a Grand Arbiter too, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, you'll see a wide variety of decks.
It's probably closer to an LGS feel than maybe like
I think setting. So. I think you're right. I think this is like way closer to an LGS meta than like anywhere else you'll probably find.
Right.
Because there is like people playing like suboptimal stuff, but at the same time they're playing optimally, which is like kind of like my experience with the LGS meta is all about. So
Yes, exactly.
yeah, if you want to play against me in the practice meta, just ping me sometime. I'm Braden on there. I'll always play games. I'll crush you with Paco, and you'll see why I like the card. Hint, it involves me drawing 5 cards a turn for 0 mana.
And I don't know if we said this, just to be 100% clear, this is the meta that plays over the web app Cockatrice, and that's how all of those games are played. There's no real webcam or anything like that.
Nah, I don't like playing a
CEDH
webcam.
meta.
My internet connection's too garbage.
That is can confirm. Okay, so the next meta we are going to talk about is that of the CEDH Nexus. So as far as the RCEDH practice meta, that is kind of Braden's stomping ground, and the Nexus has been my stomping ground for the past basically month. Or actually, I guess longer than that now. So let's talk about the Nexus. One thing that's different than the RCEDH meta you're going to see is that Nexus has an apprenticeship role, which means that when people first show up on the Nexus, they basically have to play one of the recommended database lists until about a month's time has passed, and they obviously have to be like actively playing. And that is basically to, make sure everyone understands the competitive mindset, make sure they're all playing competitive decks. And that was kind of formed when sort of the opposite thing was happening. So just as a little context for the meta, it's a Discord. People play over webcam. And sort of like the RCEDH meta, there is both a ranked and an unranked way to play. So for those of you that don't know, I actually worked my butt off the past couple months to take #1 spot in the ranked league basically a couple days ago. So I've been playing a lot of both metas. So like especially if I'm like testing new decks, stuff like that, I definitely do play the non-ranked meta a lot, but the ranked meta is also equally as fun and viable, and you're going to see a lot of different stuff. So let's talk about some of the things you are inclined to see when you're there. As I said, the non-ranked games, you're inclined to see a lot more testing. I found that the meta has been really, really big with people trying out new stuff. So, for example, the past month plus of Ikoria, people were sleeving up Riel decks for the first time. Not as much Paco and things like that, but we were seeing a lot of Kinnan, we were seeing a lot of Riel. Obviously, the Zerda being included in Evolution was like a big thing for that. So there's a lot of like new spice being tested as far as that's concerned. Ukima and Kazur was played a decent amount. So one special thing about the Nexus is that cards are allowed to be played as soon as they are spoiled. And they are 100% proxy friendly. Obviously, the better you can make the proxies to help your opponents over webcam is totally fine. But like, there have been people who I've played with who are just not in a position where they can find a printer, especially given the times right now. And so they just have a card with a white piece of paper and the name written on it and what the card does. And like, that is totally 100% okay, and people can do that in both ranked and unranked games, and that is something that's totally fine. And obviously, we support the 100% pro proxy mentality because this is an expensive hobby. But so yeah, as I said, cards are allowed as soon as they are spoiled, so it is a very big testing grounds. I can't tell you how many Riel and Kinnan decks I've seen over the past month and a half, 2 months. So another sort of aspect of it is that it is the home of the majority of the players in the Evolution project, which is, everyone who was on that podcast the other week when we did the interview with Alton and Hire, and obviously myself, who've been kind of like big members in the Evolution project. We all sort of play in that meta. And then I just had a bullet point sort of strategies now prevalent in the post-Flash world. I've seen more Najila decks than I could possibly count. I see a healthy amount of Food Chain for Sliver. They do have a healthy amount of Turbo Ad Nauseam decks. The one of the moderators of the server, Deke, built a Turbo Ad Nauseam Golos deck, which is the whole point of it is basically to either turbo out an early Ad Naus or turbo out an early Golos to get you a Beseiju to make your Ad Nauseam uncounterable, and he's been doing very well with that deck. As of the past couple weeks, I've been seeing a lot more Hermit Druid strategies. Those are starting to pop back up now, basically because we need a 2-mana win the game engine within the place of Flash. Right after the post-ban Flash, I was seeing a lot of Blood Pod. I always see a lot of Gitrog. It's kind of in the Najila spot where it's just like that, and Najila are definitely the decks I probably see the most of. A lot of Ikoria testing. And then something, as I mentioned earlier, is there's a lot of the quote, I like to call them my decks. So, for example, myself, I've been playing Evolution nonstop. That is like the deck I have been working on for like a decent amount of time, and it is the deck I play in like all my ranked games that I'm very comfortable with. I have a friend on there named Brandon who basically exclusively plays Animar. He's been playing it for years. He's very confident with it. He has his own variant of the list that's a little off the primer, and he's submitted it before. That's like his deck. So there's a lot of people who come in with that my deck mentality. And Braden, I know you've seen a healthy amount of this. It's the evolution from casual EDH into competitive EDH, with people coming in with these decks that they work. We've talked about it before, right? With the people who work tirelessly on their one list. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
So a lot of people end up actually brewing their own personal lists and sort of just like tuning them and tuning them and tuning them and tuning them until they're exactly where they want them to be in that moment, and then they make changes as the deck evolves over time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also like the people who are like, for example, when we were at the DDM event, the guy who had the like foil miscut Una who'd been playing the deck since like 2015, right?
Yeah,
like,
yeah, and there's also like the guy who was on Sphinx Tribal. If you're like one of those people, the online metas are like really great because you can kind of like build into a niche. One problem is that this is why the fish meta is so relevant, is because you'll build into one niche and then find that your deck is absolutely useless against another niche. So
right, exactly.
if you want to test your deck and like see how good or how bad it is, being able to like test against those niches is like, that's one reason that it's so popular to talk about other metas and have conversations like this one, so that you can have more context for like where your deck might be good or might be bad.
Right, right. And it's very interesting to see I mean, as someone who, evolved out of playing a lot of casual EDH, like I was playing casual EDH for years in comparison to my competitive EDH history, people really get attached to their decks. There's those people who, like, as you said, have like foil miscuts of their commander, or like 3 copies of it, all with different alternate signed art, and the deck's foiled. And like these are their pet projects, their babies that they work on. And I have my friend Reed at my local meta who has been playing Intet for close to a decade now. And like that list he's been working on and perfecting. And you see a lot of people do that in CEDH, or at least you see there are people in the meta you have to kind of be ready for. And when people feel confident enough about them, they do join things like ranked pods with these decks. And if they are competent enough pilots, and if they put in the appropriate work, it pays off for them.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun too, like being able to be the person who can say like, oh, I made medium green, or Paco's Modern Life, or Evolution, or Blue Pod, or Narumina.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole bunch of communities all around where there's discords specifically devoted to each deck, and those people are super passionate about those decks, and it's really fun to be a part of those small like niche communities within a niche community within a niche community.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, as we kind of summarized, like there's a lot of active places you can play right now. Even in these times when we are restricted from the LGS, the online meta is really great. We are happy to accept questions from people in the Discord who want to know, where Braden and I play. We're happy to jam games with people. I jam games with people who listen to the podcast all the time, and it's really fun, and it's really awesome, and it's actually a really great place to get feedback too, because people just, you're in the middle of the game, people just chat with you and tell you everything that they've been thinking about when they listen to your stuff. And we're happy to always talk to people and listen, and always happy to get a good game in.
Yeah, it's a blast to play CDH online lately, and I'm pretty happy we've been able to do it so much.
Thank you everyone for joining us. A reminder, you can find us on a number of places such as YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, all of those places, and we are really, really getting close to hitting that 1,000 subscriber mark. Braden and I have to figure out some technical stuff on about how we're going to celebrate that as efficiently as possible, but we're working on it, and we are hoping to, keep pushing and moving the content forward. So thank you all for joining us, and we hope you have an amazing week.
Bye.
Bye.